I'm making a video with a different camera for a change. See how it works out. I don't know where the microphone is, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, you're going to do the reason why we need a better democracy kind of explanation. So, and this has to be made very concise, and I have to make it all showy sometime. We'll produce a little documentary of some kind. But, I mean, the idea of people recognizing what the value is here, that you're trying to get a proportional representation. So I could say this obvious thing, that it'd be really great if we could all win in an election, right? Where we all get a representative. We all win the election. And we can have that for legislative elections. So legislatures are supposed to reflect the people. They're not supposed to be, they don't need to be, a winner-take-all majoritarian district election. They can fully represent, by percentages, realistically, how people are, what people are, instead of representing the same majority in every district. And people just don't seem to understand, so I will try to explain. I guess, yeah, you're all kind of stupid. Sorry, but it just happens to be the truth. Alright, so let's represent people in a way that can be understood. So let's just call this a district. Well, my pen is out of good stuff. And you have different people living in the district. So we'll say we have the squares, the triangles. Let's go with circle, and we'll go with line. So they have four kinds of people. And you could say that 70% of the people are circles, and 20% are lines, and then there's 7 and 3. Okay, now obviously when an election comes up, whatever candidate of the it'd be better if I did a Democrat Republican thing, but just for the sake of this you could understand that the candidate to get elected, he's going to have to appeal to these 70%ers for sure. He's going to have to say things that circles like to hear, or he's not going to, if he offends them, he will only be capable of getting 30% of the vote, because that's all the rest of these people have. So he has no hope of offending these people and getting elected. So he has to say what they want to hear. And the real question is, once he says that, then he has to also try to glean these people. He has to say something to them. Okay, so he can get, let's say if he can get 30 or 40 or 50% of these people, he still might need a little bit of something extra. I mean, if he gets 50% of these, he's going to win. But if he's not perfect, and he doesn't get all of them, he's going to need some of these to give him something. But it's not going to be much, and he's not going to placate them if it offends these 70. So he's going to give these people nothing if it offends these 70. So if any one of these don't like the majority, they're out of luck. They got nothing. The candidate isn't going to be responsive to them at all. And obviously if you take this same pattern and you put it in every single district, every voting district, you could see that same pattern would be generally reflected. That the percentages would probably be similar in each state. That most people have kids, or most people do this, or most people do that. And the numbers are going to be variable, but they'll be similar. So maybe in this state it's only 50% of the people are circles, and only and this percentage is 30, and then you got 20 and 10 as the numbers. So yeah, it's a different demographic. It's a slightly different, but the same mechanism is going to be in place. We know what's going to win in the end is the baby kisser, if that's what you have to be. So even though these people have percentages nationwide, they might have, let's say the squares across the whole country have 20%. Well, that's probably going a little too high, right? We'll say they have 10, and the triangles have let's say 15, across the whole country, and the lines have 30. What are we up to? 25, 55. So the circles have 45. you would say if you had a representative democracy that then 10% of the representatives should be squares, and 15% should be triangles, and 30% should be lines, and 45% should be circles. But in our actual legislatures, what happens because of this winner-take-all effect, these people always get to take all the votes. So these two groups will consume all the seats, essentially. And these 25% of the people will have zero. They will get nothing from the system. They'll get no representation, no voice, nothing, zero. And they'll have the offense of having their, like, squares, let's say, absolutely hate. I mean, they hate circles, and vice versa. And so these circle people will be claiming they're representing these square people, which will even add greater offense to this whole disgusting rudeness. The rudeness of not having a voice is bad enough, but to have these people say, I'm representing you, when they're not, is really horrible. And so if you create a non-geographic based election system, then you just have, you can say, you can just pick a number, it doesn't matter. You have 100 seats in Congress, and you can just say that to win a seat, let's say there's 100 million people that voted last year. You just say that you need 1 million votes to be a congressman. And so whoever runs, they just have to get to this 1 million vote number. And so with using computers, it could simply be done where you rank your vote when you go to vote. You vote for a first choice and a second choice and a third choice, a fourth choice. And you could legally, we could have quite a few of these. We could allow people to vote for 10 people on their list. And your vote would be, it would go to the person who can best use your vote. So you can count the votes in different ways that'll change the outcome subtly, but it really doesn't matter. But so if you just go by the votes as they come in randomly, you could just say, what's his first choice? You find out if his first choice has 1 million votes or not. If they don't have 1 million votes, then his vote goes to that first choice candidate. Now, if this first choice candidate doesn't reach 1 million votes, okay, then you have an instant runoff voting, which is the same as it's called IRV, but you just have this mechanism that will automatically then put this ballot back into the pool. And so based on the lowest guy. So let's say once all the ballots are counted, there's, let's say, 50 of the seats are full. They have the required 1 million votes. So those guys are elected. The other 50 have various amounts. One guy might have 950,000, and one guy might have 100,000. The guy at the lowest. So what would happen is the lowest guy would be wiped out, and anybody who voted for him would go back to their ballot and go to their number 2 choice. And now we would put the number 2 choices into these 50 and see which ones of these 50 were the number 2 choice. And if it's a number 2 choice, then the vote would go to that guy and up his amount. And you just keep killing the lowest guys until you wipe out all the lower ones, and this higher number, and these guys will keep getting these votes because it'll be somewhere on the guy's list is going to be one of these remaining people. And in the end, when there's no other on the list of a ballot, say the ballot gets to the end of the list, then the vote just goes back to the original guy who has over 1 million votes, who's already elected. If that's their first choice, he's already elected. It'll go back to him, and he'll apportion his vote to one of these remaining candidates. You know, whatever, the 10 that are left or whatever. So this number would start to increase, and so now you're up to 85%, let's say, are elected. And now these 85% would hold some of these ballots, and they would decide by apportioning their votes to these last remaining guys, and then you just start electing these guys based on their number. And their number would eventually reach the 1 million because you have 100 million voters. So it's a perfectly rational system that will produce, in the end, this result, which will be that even small minorities will get their 10% of their representation. So for example, there's 20 million cigarette smokers in the country, and if people were animate that they don't appreciate being taxed, they could make sure that their candidate was pro-freedom to smoke. And you know, the triangle people could make sure their candidate, let's say they were tree huggers, they could make sure they get that tree hugger policy. And obviously there'd be a lot more diversity here. The racists, of course, would get their racist, bigoted candidate. Everybody would get their candidate, and then in the Congress, they'd have a real fight. You know, instead of the fake fight we have with the two-party system, you'd have to have a real fight. You'd have to, you know, with honest men. Instead of everybody being compromised by a party and being a sellout, you'd have to fight over every one of these policies. There wouldn't be any democratic platform that you were obliged to acquiesce to and suck up to. Every bill would be an honest bill because nobody would belong to parties anymore. You wouldn't be party candidates. You'd be a candidate representing constituents who expected you to do certain things, and if you didn't do them, you're not going to get elected again. That's simple, because they're going to have the freedom to vote for somebody else next time. They're not going to vote for you again because you're the only choice in their district because you're running against some asshole. You're not going to win re-election because there's some asshole running against you. You're going to have to earn it. You're going to have to make the people want to vote for you again. So, yeah, so we can have an honest system that allows a real democracy to take place, that allows for real arguments to take place, that allows us to vote our conscience, not lies, not sellouts. I mean, right now the Republicans are a sellout party in the sense that they give the religious minority of, say, 30% of the people, the fanatics, power, and they give the elitist 3% of the richest people in the world power. And so they sell out to these rich incentives, these rich special interests, and the religious nuts, two minorities that don't deserve to own as big a territory of our politics as they own. They would be less franchised in a real democracy. But yeah, you'd have the freedom if you were a financial conservative to vote for a Republican and not have to accept the burden of voting for religious fanaticism. And vice versa. You could be a religious fanatic without voting for unrestrained capitalism. We'd have the freedom to vote our conscience, our ideology, what we believed in, and we'd all win the election. You couldn't possibly lose the election for a representative. There'd be no way to lose, because the only place your vote can go is to somebody you voted for. And you know, I mean, you know, to me, it's just so obviously this is the way to go. I mean, we all should have representatives. I shouldn't lose an election for somebody who's supposed to represent me. Representing me isn't that difficult. I know what I believe in. I know what the guy who's supposed to represent me should look like and sound like. And I know the assholes my whole life who have represented me haven't sounded like me at all. I mean, I'd love to live in a country where I actually had a democratic representative. I've never had one. In my whole fucking life, I've never had somebody representing me in any legislature. They've always been people who have stolen my vote, my right to representation. So, this is just, it really, you know, it has a little bit of subtlety and complexity in that you have to recognize that, okay, a little bit of technology has to be applied here, but it's just such a huge advance in our political democracy, and it's all positive in terms of creating real representation, creating a real sense of who we are and what we are, and having a real argument about the real issues instead of this compromise, this stupid argument about how deep the compromise will be. So anyway, that's my argument for this video. More to come and such. So until next time, see how this works out. Such.